Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're coming to the close of Paul's letter to the Colossians. We're going to be in chapter 4. We're going to read verses 10 through 14. We mentioned before that the farewell section of this letter is longer than nearly any other, longer than any other except Rome, the one for the letter to the Romans. And both in Colossae and in Rome, both these cities are cities he hasn't been to yet, but he has lots of connections there. People with him who are connected, people who are there that he's connected to. And so he's going to take a lot of time to establish that bond in that way. So we're going to look at verses 10 through 14. Let's not forget the other looming issues that are the subtext of this letter. One is Roman persecution, and the other is the fate of Onesimus, as Paul has sent him back to Philemon. Okay, 10 through 14. He's talking about the people who are with him who send greetings in these verses. Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, sends you his greetings. Also, Barnabas's cousin, Mark, about whom you received instructions. If he comes to you, welcome him. Also, Jesus, Yeshua, who is called Justice. These are the only fellow workers for the kingdom of God who are from the circumcision, and they have proved to be an encouragement to me. Epaphras, who is one of your number, a bondslave of Jesus Christ, sends you his greetings, always laboring earnestly for you in his prayers that you may stand perfect and fully assured in all the will of God. I bear him witness that he has a deep concern for you and for those who are in Laodicea and Hierapolis. Luke, the beloved physician, sends you his greetings, and also Demas. There's so much here, particularly when we read our book of Acts, when we read Peter, when we read Philippians, when we read Paul's letter to Timothy, Second Timothy, that connect directly to some of the people that he's talking about here. We know Aristarchus from the book of Acts. We know him from Acts chapter 20. We know him from Acts chapter 24. Aristarchus traveled with Paul to Jerusalem before he was arrested, and then went with Paul as he left Caesarea and was headed to Rome, and was on the boat with Paul. So was Luke, and was involved in the shipwreck that they narrowly escaped. So Aristarchus has been with him through all of this end journey that he's made. And Aristarchus now finds himself in jail along with Paul as a Christian. Aristarchus is a Greek name, but he's a Jew. So Paul mentions these three men who are Jewish Christians. It says of the circumcision. That's an unusual way of saying this, of saying that they are Jews. And it could be that they are James's men, that they are of the party of circumcision, who, in other words, this could be code for these are Jewish Christians who are still observing Judaism, although they are fully Christians. They're still observing the law of Moses as Christians. And Paul goes out of his way to say about them, they've been very profitable for me. So it's almost like he has to vouch for their faithfulness. Um, and he mentions Mark, and it's almost like he has to say something extra about Mark. And he's written them instructions about Mark, and that seems full of meaning. And maybe they knew that Mark was on the outs with Paul for a while, but he's not anymore. If you read Second Timothy, you know that Paul says to Timothy, "Bring Mark with you to Rome. He's profitable for the ministry." We know that after Paul's dead, Peter's not dead yet. That Mark is there with Peter in Rome. We know that from Second Peter. So anyway. Um, so there's Mark who's there with him as well, and then Jesus who's called Justice. We don't know him otherwise from this letter. There's Epaphras. That's a shortening of the name Epaphroditus, and he's from Colossae. This is not to be confused with the other Epaphroditus We read about it in Philippians chapter 2, also a prison epistle that Paul may have written at the same time, who is one of their own, who is from Philippi. These are two different men named Epaphroditus who are on behalf of local congregations, one in Macedonia, one in Asia, are ministering to Paul during his time in prison. And Paul uses the phrase, he's wrestling for you in his prayers because he loves the folks back home. And Paul has used that phrase, wrestling in prayer, earlier when he talks about him praying for them. I wrestle for you in prayer. Well, Epaphras is wrestling for you in prayer as well. He's worried about you. He has a deep concern not just for you, but all the Christians in the Tri-City area. And we talked about how Colossae is part of a Tri-City area with Hierapolis and Laodicea, and that Colossae was originally the most important of the three, but now it's the least of the three. Laodicea is the big dog of the Tri-City area at this point. And so Paul, is letting them know, folks are here with me, and they worry about you and are concerned about you too. And they send their greetings as well. And he mentions Luke. And this is where he calls Luke the beloved physician. Luke, we know, writes Luke and Acts because much of the end of Acts fall under the heading of what we call the we passages. So that the author of Acts is saying, we did this, we did that. We got on the boat, we had a shipwreck, we ended up on Malta. And so Luke is there for all of it. In fact, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, when the Apostle Paul says, everybody has deserted me, I've sent some away, some have just deserted me, and no one stood up with me but Jesus when I had to face the lion. He said, but Luke was there. Luke is always there. Luke is there. The fact that he was a physician is important too. In the first century, physicians were very well educated in a variety of regimens. They would have been educated in philosophy because the great writers about medicine were also philosophers. They would have been educated in what was known up to that point, not in the first century, not only in Greek and Roman medicine, but probably what was known from Persia and Egypt, and would have had probably a pretty good knowledge of holistic medicine, would have known methods that would have been lost during the Dark Ages. I would probably have rather Luke treated me than any doctor before 1940 if I had an issue. And but it's also true that most men who were given this education were either slaves or freedmen, people who had recently been slaves, and they showed great intelligence and aptitude, and therefore they were given this training. So Luke may have been a slave himself before he became the beloved physician that goes on the missionary journeys with the Apostle Paul. And then Demas. Everybody gets a comment but Demas. And and Demas. That's it. Demas is here. Demas is mentioned because maybe they know who Demas is. You'd think so. But as we know from 2 Timothy chapter 4, Demas deserts Paul in Rome because he loves this present world. And so we're not surprised that there's not much mention made of Demas in Colossians 4. He's probably already just starting to spin out of orbit at this point. Okay, thank you for giving me 9 good minutes with the word. We're going to pick up with verse 15 next time and finish the text of Colossians. So thank you for joining me.